Chapter 21. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Facing Ji Xuanjing's confused expression, Jiang Hao knew exactly what he was thinking. His human emperor physique made him immune to all poisons. Actually, his digestive system was just too efficient. Not only did it rapidly process the essence of the world and regular food, but poisons were no exception. Most poisons had virtually no effect on him, and some even boosted his cultivation. After all, high-level poisons were usually made from valuable and rare materials, which, for Jiang Hao, were basically vitamins. But this was a personal secret, so Jiang Hao wasn't about to spill the beans to Ji Xuanjing. Instead, he came up with a quick lie. Maybe you got ripped off and bought fake poison? No way, Ji Xuanjing said, eyes widening in disbelief. Fake tonics were one thing, but fake poison? Was the seller trying to avoid murder charges? Still, Jiang Hao looked perfectly fine, not even breaking a sweat. Fake poison seemed like the only explanation. Did I buy fake poison? That low-life dealer. Seeing that Jiang Hao was unharmed, Ji Xuanjing reluctantly accepted this explanation and cursed under his breath. Jiang Hao smiled, shrugged, and quickly pressed his point. Looks like it's fate. Maybe you should reconsider my offer. We don't have to get involved in each other's business. You go your way, I go mine. I swear I won't tell anyone who you are. What do you say? Never. Ji Xuanjing's eyes turned hard, and he rejected Jiang Hao's offer without hesitation. I may hate that bitch, Ji Luoyao, for stealing my throne, but you're just as guilty. Without you, how could she have succeeded? So, I hate you just as much as her. Ji Xuanjing's face was full of bitter resentment. Maybe the old him wouldn't have been so extreme, but years of hatred had twisted him. Every time he looked at his disfigured face, the hatred grew stronger. Now that he finally had an opportunity, there was no way he was letting Jiang Hao off the hook. Right now, Ji Luoyao is only focused on weakening the vassal states. The court and everyone else are distracted by that. This is the perfect time to strike. Even if I kill you, I can get away with it. If poison doesn't work, I'll do it myself. Ji Xuanjing stood up, a surge of power rolling off of him. As a prince of the great Zhou dynasty and a direct descendant of the Ji family, his talent might not match Ji Luoyao's human king physique, but it wasn't bad by any means. Years of running and hiding had stunted his progress, but even so, he was still a genuine Dragon Gate realm powerhouse. And he practiced heaven-level martial arts from the royal family. If he went all out, he could even put up a fight against an ordinary earthly evil realm powerhouse. In his mind, taking out a powerless civil servant like Jiang Hao would be a piece of cake. Seriously? Can't we all just get along? Jiang Hao said with a sigh. He honestly didn't want to fight, not because he was a nice guy, but because he didn't want to help Ji Luoyao solve her problems. He just never expected Ji Xuanjing to be so stubborn, so hellbent on killing him. In that case, Jiang Hao had no choice but to send him on his way. Boom. Once he made up his mind, Jiang Hao didn't hold back. His own power exploded. They might both be in the Dragon Gate realm, but these Dragon Gate realms were worlds apart. Even with the royal family's heaven-level martial arts, Ji Xuanjing could only open 108 acupoints. Jiang Hao, on the other hand, had opened up a full 360 acupoints. The energy they could draw on was on different levels. Add in the human emperor physique, and the gap was even more ridiculous. Sometimes, the difference between two people is bigger than the difference between a person and a dog. When Jiang Hao unleashed his power, Ji Xuanjing, who had been so confident just moments before, felt like a small boat caught in a hurricane. This. How is this possible? Ji Xuanjing was frozen solid. His eyes bugged out so wide they looked like they would pop. It was like watching the sun rise in the west. He was shocked beyond belief. What was he seeing? Wasn't it a known fact that Duke Weigua, Jiang Hao, had terrible talent for cultivation? Wasn't he supposed to be powerless? What was going on here? Someone, please explain. No, it's impossible. It's fake. All of this is fake. Boom. Before he could finish, there was a deafening crash, and he flew backward like a cannonball. He slammed into the wall of the cell. Fortunately, the walls of the 18th level of the sky prison were solid iron. An ordinary wall wouldn't have withstood that kind of impact. The hard wall left Ji Xianjing dizzy and spitting up blood. Before he could react, Jiang Hao had appeared in front of him like a ghost. "You're too weak," Jiang Hao said flatly. The overwhelming advantage left Ji Xianjing utterly defenseless. Jiang Hao grabbed him by the neck. He lifted him off the ground. Looking into Jiang Hao's cold eyes, Ji Xuanjing's heart pounded. Fear and panic overwhelmed him, shrouding him in darkness. He was terrified. He didn't want to die. Even after years of running and hiding, living worse than a dog, he still clung to life, because life held infinite possibilities, but death was final. "Spare me. Please. I'll cooperate with you. I'll do whatever you want. Be your puppet. I'll listen to you. Please. Spare my life." Desperate to survive, Ji Xianjing begged, sobbing and stuttering. Jiang Hao was unmoved, his cold eyes unchanged. After his experience with Ji Luoyao, he understood that all the Ji family descendants were treacherous. Given the chance, they would stab you in the back. They weren't worth trusting. I gave you a chance. It's a shame you didn't take it. Don't blame me. With that, Jiang Hao's fingers tightened. With a click, he crushed Ji Xuanjing's neck, killing him instantly. Looking at Ji Xuanjing's lifeless body, Jiang Hao frowned, not because he felt bad about killing Ji Xianjing, but because the guy's identity was a major problem. If anyone found out that Ji Xianjing had died here, his life would become a living hell. With that thought, Jiang Hao summoned the shadow demon and commanded, "Take care of this body." "Understood, master." That the shadow demon cackled and dove into Ji Xuanjing's body like it was second nature. The possession was complete. In a moment, Ji Xianjing was alive again. He put on a human skin mask and transformed into the old jailer. Having familiarized himself with the body, he picked up the square box and hobbled out. From the 18th level to the top floor, the prison was filled with checkpoints. It would be a challenge for even skilled fighters to escape, but the old man could easily get through by using his status as a jailer. Soon, he was outside. It was completely dark, controlled by the shadow demon. He made his way to a mass grave outside the city. The last time the shadow demon was here, it was to dispose of the Archbishop of the Black Witch cult. In a sense, Ji Xianjing was now a neighbor of the Archbishop of the Black Witch cult. A moment later, the shadow demon vanished, leaving only Ji Xuanjing's body behind. Soon, a pack of wild beasts came, drawn by the scent. Chapter 22. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just like the Archbishop of the Black Witch cult's death, Ji Xuanjing's went unnoticed. At least the Archbishop was a known power in the Great Zhou Empire. Ji Xianjing, on the other hand, was disguised as an ordinary, low-level jailer in the heavenly prison. Who would care about a nobody jailer dying? Even if someone found the body and peeled off the mask, they wouldn't connect that disfigured face to the famous third prince. Everyone knew third prince Ji Xianjing died in the chaos of the rebellion. Right now, the whole country of Great Zhou was focused on the Empress's plan to dismantle the feudal system. Compared to that huge event, a jailer dying in the heavenly prison was like a speck of dust. So, after Jiang Hao dealt with Ji Xianjing, life went on as usual. The only change was a new jailer bringing his food. He ate and slept as always, lying down for 38 days. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the top-tier treasure, the Azure Dragon Sword. Another day, another dollar. Jiang Hao woke up to the system's announcement, top-tier treasure, the Azure Dragon Sword. Looks like today's my lucky day. Jiang Hao was stoked. He quickly summoned the sword, and it materialized before him, looking like something straight out of a fairy tale. The sheathed sword was about 4 feet long, dark blue, with a mysterious shimmer like a firefly in the dark. Jiang Hao gripped the sheath and hilt, drawing the sword. The Azure Dragon Sword was fully revealed. The blade was even more striking than the scabbard. It looked like it had a green dragon totem etched into it, fangs bared, claws out, almost alive. It was like the swordsmith had sealed a real dragon inside. When Jiang Hao channeled his energy into the blade, the green dragon's eyes snapped open as if it had come to life. A terrifying, heart-stopping pressure radiated outwards. Instantly, sharp sword energy surged. The entire 18th floor of the heavenly prison filled with a dreadful aura, centered on the Azure Dragon Sword. It was like a special energy field had formed. With just a flick of the azure dragon sword, Jiang Hao could unleash devastating power. Even an extraordinary fighter would struggle to defend against such an attack. It could slice through anything. This is a top-tier weapon, alright. Jiang Hao's eyes lit up. Besides regular weapons, powerful fighters use special treasure weapons made of rare materials. Ordinary weapons couldn't handle the flow of yuanli from extraordinary fighters. They'd explode if forced. Treasure weapons were different. They were made of special materials, forged using secret techniques only master smiths knew. Plus, each treasure weapon had special runes carved into it, boosting its performance far beyond what ordinary weapons could do. Treasure weapons were ranked into low grade, mid grade, high grade, and top grade, based on how many runes they had. 1 to 12 runes meant it was a low-grade treasure weapon, 13 to 24 runes made it mid-grade, 25 to 36 meant a high-grade weapon, and 37 to 48 runes marked a top-grade treasure weapon. The Azure Dragon sword had a whopping 46 runes, making it a rare, top-grade weapon. It was even a top-tier item among the top-tier weapons. What a killer sword! Jiang Hao couldn't stop grinning. What guy could resist getting an awesome sword? Flowing white robes, singing and swaying with the sword, slaying one person every 10 steps, disappearing without a trace for 1,000 miles, or, sword energy reaching 30,000 miles, the sword's light chilling 19 continents. Jiang Hao once had that dream, wanting to be an invincible swordsman, but reality got in the way, so he had to let it go. But now, he might be able to make his old dreams come true. But I'm still missing a top-level sword technique. System, you know what I mean, right? Don't get me wrong. Praise me, force me to beg you. He joked to himself. Then, Jiang Hao returned the Azure Dragon sword to the system storage. The sword was great, but without a good sword technique, it was just a fancy piece of metal. Days turned into weeks. Life in prison was calm and comfortable, but outside, things were heating up. The Empress's plan to reduce the power of the feudal lords wasn't going smoothly. Jiang Hao was right. The Empress Ji Luoyao, a control freak, didn't trust anyone to handle something so important. She believed in herself most of all, but her constant micromanaging didn't help, and actually made things worse for the court. Originally, the court, with its concentrated power, could have overcome the combined strength of the lords. It wouldn't be a guaranteed victory, but there wouldn't be any huge mistakes. But the Empress had a different idea. She ignored the advice of veteran generals and ministers, and instead sent some of her trusted underlings with a small army and light cavalry to attack. She planned to take down the most powerful prince, the Prince of Yen, and then use that to scare the other lords. Then, she'd sweep across the country and finish the job quickly. It sounded good in theory, but it was hard to pull off. The Prince of Yen, the strongest of the lords, wasn't a pushover, even back when the Empress's father was alive. The Prince of Yen had a powerful army. It hadn't grown much since then, but it hadn't weakened either. Only Jiang Hao, with his watchful eye and reputation, had kept the King of Yen in check, maintaining a balance, until Ji Luoyao suddenly imprisoned Jiang Hao, and her subsequent actions caused widespread panic. The Prince of Yen saw his chance and began making preparations, so, the detachment sent by Ji Luoyao ran headfirst into the Prince of Yan's well-prepared army. The result was predictable. Even if they weren't completely defeated, they took heavy losses. They had no choice but to retreat and wait for reinforcements. The planned blitzkrieg turned into a drawn-out offensive. It might not seem like a big deal, but they wasted valuable time, giving the Prince of Yen a chance to regroup. He used that time to prepare for war, and also to convince the other lords to join him. The other lords knew they were all in the same boat, especially after the Prince of Yen successfully repelled the first attack. The court's army didn't seem so strong after all. So, 7 princes joined him. Together with the Prince of Yen, they launched the rebellion of the 8 kings. That the court and the public were shocked, and the north fell into chaos. The Empress finally started to panic. Chapter 23. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Great Zhou Dynasty, Taishan Hall, morning court was usually orderly, but today it was a madhouse. Officials from all sides were shouting opinions, and there wasn't a single point of agreement. The failed attempt to curtail the power of the vassal states had clearly blown up in their faces. The news of the 8 kings' rebellion had sent shockwaves through the government and the people, and it wasn't just the 8 kings in the north anymore. Other vassal kings were getting ready to make their own plays, some of the bolder ones had even started locking up officials sent by the court. No one had officially declared open rebellion yet, but everyone knew that if the court couldn't crush the 8 kings, the other kings would follow suit. The once peaceful Great Zhou dynasty felt like it was caught in a hurricane. Your Majesty, I suggest we call up the border troops immediately and use them to secure the capital. Then, we can crush these traitorous kings once and for all. An old general stepped forward to offer his 2 cents. The Great Zhou dynasty was huge and had a lot of soldiers, but the border troops were hands down the toughest. The 8 kings might have 1,000,000 men, but the general was confident the border troops could take them down. Absolutely not. A government official immediately jumped in. That's a terrible idea. That man is a troublemaker trying to plunge the world into chaos. Your Majesty, I beg you, punish him now. What did you call me, you little weasel? The old general's face turned red as he unleashed a thundering roar. The official stood his ground. Border troops are known to be unruly and brutal. They're like wolves and tigers. Now that the court's authority is weakened, who knows what might happen if we bring a large number of them to the capital? What if some ambitious person decided to use them for their own purposes? Several officials chimed in. He's right. The situation is bad, but not that bad. We don't need the border troops. I don't recommend calling up the border troops. Not enough soldiers, and it's useless. Too many, and the borders are wide open to attack. Border troops are strong, but too far away to help. We need to find another solution. The court officials had always been wary of the border troops. Throughout history, border troops had always been a threat if they got too powerful. I say we send in the Imperial Guard and crush the 8 kings before they get their footing. The Imperial Guard is here to protect the capital. If they all go out, who's gonna defend us if something happens? This is no good. That's no good. Are we just gonna sit here and watch those traitors take over? We're talking about military and national security. We need to be cautious and think long-term. Everyone was arguing and shouting, and the hall was a mess. Empress Ji Luoyao watched the chaos silently from her throne, her thoughts hidden behind a cool expression. Finally, seeing no end in sight, her face darkened with fury. The failed attempt to reduce the vassal state's power had damaged the court's reputation, and her own. She knew that's why these officials dared to act so brazenly. She took a deep breath, barely keeping her anger in check. Are you finished? As she spoke, she tapped into her cultivation, and a dark, intimidating aura filled the hall. The officials immediately snapped to attention. No matter how strong they were, they knew better than to challenge the Empress in public. Seeing her displeasure, they finally shut their mouths and turned respectful eyes toward the throne. But Ji Luoyao knew she was just using her own power to silence them. That wouldn't last. If she didn't solve this problem, it would come back to bite her. But for now, that was the least of her worries. The situation had changed so fast that even she, the one who started it all, was struggling to keep up. All she could do was try to hold things together. She wasn't a qualified ruler, not yet. Anyway, she knew that now, this time, she wouldn't act alone. She would listen to others' ideas. These rebels are creating chaos and undermining the government. You are all pillars of this nation, and it's time to work together. What good does arguing do? Ji Luoyao glared at the hall before focusing on the First Minister. First Minister, do you have any plans? Your Majesty is wise, and we will follow your Majesty's lead. Second Minister, what about you? Military strategy isn't my strong suit. I wouldn't dare interfere. Your Majesty should consult the Privy Envoy. Privy Envoy? Well, what about calling up soldiers from all over the realm to defend the capital? She asked several high-ranking officials, but their answers were disappointing and infuriating. She had hand-picked these people to replace Jiang Hao. They were her loyal followers. With their help, she had taken control of the court and silenced all opposition, but now, it seemed they were just yes-men. They were good for flattery, but useless in a crisis. Elder, do you have a solution? Desperate, Ji Luoyao turned to an old minister. The elder's hair was white, but his eyes were sharp. After a moment of silence, he stepped forward. I would never deceive your Majesty. In my opinion, the situation is even worse than we think. The vassal king's rebellion is just the beginning, but the underlying issues are far more dangerous. The border troops are unreliable. There are many hidden forces watching, waiting for the court to show weakness so they can pounce like wolves. It hasn't been that long since the death of the previous emperor. People's trust is only temporary. The court has accumulated very little power. He was basically saying that the Empress should never have tried to weaken the vassal states and start this war. It was a clear reprimand. The Empress was visibly annoyed, but she had to think about the fate of the empire. Suppressing her anger, she asked, "Do you have a way out of this mess?" "No." The blunt answer stunned everyone. Wow, bold, after all that criticism, he had no solution. Even the good-tempered Empress would be furious. Ji Luoyao was fuming. If the elder hadn't served 3 emperors, she would have kicked him out of the court, but then, the elder spoke again. "While I don't have a solution, I know someone who does. Someone who can turn the tide like no other in this world." That he looked at the Empress with burning eyes. He didn't need to say the person's name. Everyone knew who he was talking about. All eyes turned to the Empress. Faced with the gazes of the entire court, Ji Luoyao fell into a long, heavy silence. Chapter 24. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ji Luoyao knew exactly who the old minister meant when he spoke of someone who could turn things around. Even before he finished, Jiang Hao's name had already popped into her head. If Jiang Hao were still alive, would I even be sweating this? She wondered. Back when she'd first taken the throne, the country was in constant revolt. The situation then was far worse than it was now, but Jiang Hao, with his troop deployments and strategies, had quelled the chaos in just a few years, and after several years of hard work and recovery, he'd handed her a great Zhou dynasty with the unwavering loyalty of its people. He was a pillar of the country, a stabilizing force for both the civil service and the military. To many, Jiang Hao, the Duke of Wei, was the ultimate capable minister. Looking back at the history of the Great Zhou, with its countless famous ministers and wise men, few could compare. It was this reputation, earned through action, that gave Jiang Hao such weight in the Great Zhou. If he were still around, she could simply give an order and await victory. Unfortunately, Jiang Hao was gone, and she was the one who'd thrown him in prison. For the first time in ages, Ji Luoyao felt a twinge of regret, but it vanished quickly, because she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. As the ruler of the Great Zhou, should she be a mere puppet? Shouldn't she have her own ambitions? She wasn't wrong. The only one at fault was Jiang Hao. Jiang Hao's mistake. Being too damn good. Facing the hopeful eyes of her officials, Ji Luoyao understood what they wanted, but she couldn't give it to them. Court adjourned. That the words came out of her mouth, cold and sharp, ignoring everyone's reaction. Ji Luoyao turned and left. Back at the palace, Ji Luoyao still couldn't shake her troubled thoughts. It had been almost 2 months since Jiang Hao's imprisonment. She replayed her actions in her mind. First off, she was working harder than ever before. She'd watched Jiang Hao handle government affairs and thought it looked easy. Now, she realized the tediousness and complexity were beyond her imagination. No one said it out loud, but she knew she'd made plenty of mistakes, and they weren't just minor blunders. The vassal king issue was a major headache, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Coupled with the related problems, a wrong move could send the Great Zhou spiraling in a dangerous direction. She regretted rushing into the decision to reduce the power of the vassal states. It was impulsive. But it was too late for regrets. Could it be? Am I really not as good as him? She hated to admit it. She was the Empress of the Great Zhou dynasty, a ruler by birthright. How could she be inferior to a mere minister? But the facts were hard to ignore. She spun around, fixing her gaze on the young female official attending her. "Qing'er," she asked seriously, "am I wrong, that the female official, Shangwan Qing, wasn't just any servant? She was Ji Luoyao's personal maid, having grown up alongside her. After Ji Luoyao became empress, Shangwan Qing had remained by her side, her most trusted confidant. She knew Ji Luoyao better than anyone." Faced with the empress's question, Shangwan Qing understood. She gently shook her head. "Your Majesty, you're in turmoil." "Yes, I'm in turmoil. I've been in turmoil from the start." Ji Luoyao's face twisted with bitterness. My own uncle conspired to rebel against me. The officials I promoted are all trying to pull one over on me. Even God seems to be laughing at me. Tell me, what did I do wrong, that she demanded, her voice strained. How can I not be in turmoil? Your Majesty, I don't understand any grand principles, but I've heard that after the storm comes the rainbow. All hardships lead to success. She paused, looking at Ji Luoyao. Even the Duke of Wei, who you hold in such high regard, if I remember correctly, he made plenty of mistakes early on. But he learned from them, made corrections, and constantly improved. Your Majesty, you are the ruler of the great Zhou, destined to stand at the top. Your position is higher than anyone else's, so it's naturally more difficult for you to achieve great things. But I believe that if you learn from your mistakes, with your talent, you'll become a great emperor. In the future, all of this will be a great story to tell. Shang Guanqing winked playfully, ending with a compliment. Ji Luoyao couldn't help but laugh. You always know what to say, Qing'er. I feel much better after hearing your advice. Shang Guanqing shook her head. I can't take credit, Your Majesty. I just reminded you of what you already know. Ji Luoyao chuckled, pointing a finger at Shang Guanqing. Some things didn't need to be said. A sudden clarity washed over her. She stood up. Let's go. Where are we going, Your Majesty? Shang Guanqing asked. A strange glint appeared in Ji Luoyao's eyes. She took a deep breath. The heavenly prison. Shang Guanqing was stunned, seeing her reaction. Ji Luoyao smiled. The world belongs to the ruler. Is there anywhere in the great Zhou I can't go? Shang Guanqing looked terrified. No, no. That's not what I meant. I know. Ji Luoyao waved her hand. I was afraid to go before, but I've figured it out. The heavenly prison. Jiang Hao. I can go wherever I damn well please. She looked at Shang Guanqing. Shang Guanqing finally caught on. The Empress is going out. To the heavenly prison. When the Empress went out, preparations were necessary, but the sudden decision to visit the heavenly prison caught everyone off guard. After a flurry of activity, the Empress sat in the imperial sedan chair, escorted by a large number of imperial guards, on their way to the heavenly prison. When they arrived, Tao Gongwang, the warden, and a group of senior officials were already waiting at the gate to greet her. They didn't know why the Empress was inspecting the prison, but they wouldn't dare to be disrespectful. Welcome, Your Majesty. Chapter 25. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Empress, decked out in a dragon robe, hopped out of the imperial chariot, her eyes taking in the sky prison with a touch of curiosity. Forget for a moment that she was the Empress of the great Zhou dynasty. She was also stunningly beautiful. Standing before the sky prison, she looked like an angel who had descended to earth, a stark contrast to the grim surroundings. Even before the Empress could say a word, Shang Guanqing stepped up and barked at Tao Gongwang, the warden. Her Majesty is going to the bottom level. Show us the way. Tao Gongwang, the warden, might have been a big shot around here, but to Shang Guanqing, a confidant of the Empress, he was just a peon. Tao Gongwang didn't dare to refuse, and instead felt deeply honored. When he heard the bottom level, he knew exactly who the Empress wanted to see. It made sense. Sure, the sky prison held some important prisoners, but who else but the Duke of Wei, locked away at the bottom, would warrant a personal visit from the Empress? Without a word, Tao Gongwang bowed low and replied, Yes, Your Majesty. He spun around and led the way. The others in the prison didn't even wait a chance to guide. The imperial guards had taken over security, and the three of them made their way to the bottom of the prison without interruption. They soon arrived at the bottom level. The Empress, Ji Luoyao, stopped suddenly. How has he been doing in the prison? Ji Luoyao asked, looking up at Tao Gongwang. Tao Gongwang froze, unsure of the Empress's motive. Was she worried about the Duke of Wei's well-being? Or was she worried he was living too comfortably? The question seemed simple, but a wrong answer could cost him his job as warden. The moment stretched for what felt like forever. His mind raced, considering every possibility. He decided to be honest. There was no way to hide the truth. Your Majesty, since the Duke of Wei has been imprisoned, he's basically just been sleeping. except for meals. Really? Ji Luoyao was surprised. Remembering the report from Cao Xiaobing, the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, she wondered, can he really sleep that much? Well, I can't be certain, Tao Gongwang stammered, forcing a smile. But judging by his demeanor, he seems to be sleeping soundly. Sleeping soundly, Ji Luoyao narrowed her eyes, thinking of her own troubles. The contrast with Jiang Hao stung. She hadn't expected Jiang Hao to be miserable, but she certainly didn't want to hear that he was living it up. Ji Luoyao couldn't quite explain her feelings, but she definitely wasn't happy. Sounds like he's having a grand old time in prison, Ji Luoyao commented, her tone flat. Even Tao Gongwang understood that the Empress was not pleased. Terrified, he shrunk back, unsure what he'd said to upset her. He clammed up. Ji Luoyao suddenly felt bored and lost interest in the conversation. She held out her hand and said, "Give me the key. You don't need to come in." Tao Gongwang didn't dare to object and quickly handed over the key to the bottom level. Shang Wenqing was well aware of both the Empress's strength and Jiang Hao's. She didn't believe Jiang Hao posed a threat to the Empress, so she wasn't concerned. Click, click, the chains came off and the heavy cell door creaked open. Ji Luoyao stepped inside. She glanced around. The cell wasn't too bad, since Jiang Hao was the only occupant, but compared to the outside world, it was definitely a step down, especially for Ji Luoyao, who had lived in luxury since childhood. She couldn't help but frown, but she was quickly distracted when she met Jiang Hao's dark eyes. He sat on the bed, looking at her calmly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to blur. Memories flooded her mind, but unlike their last encounter, when he was emotional, Jiang Hao was calm, as if Ji Luoyao's arrival had no effect on him. "What brings Her Majesty here?" Jiang Hao asked, his tone flat. It was just a routine question. Feeling Jiang Hao's unwelcoming demeanor, Ji Luoyao couldn't help but bristle. She retorted stiffly, "The whole world belongs to the crown. Can't I come?" Jiang Hao sneered, then nodded seriously, feigning compliance. "Of course. Your Majesty is the ruler of the Great Zhou. There is no place you can't go. But the accommodations here are humble. Please forgive me for not being able to properly entertain you. Make yourself at home." He then ignored Ji Luoyao. He didn't know why Ji Luoyao had come to his cell instead of staying in the palace, but that didn't mean he had to roll out the red carpet. He had already been thrown in prison. Was he supposed to kowtow in gratitude? He was no lackey of the dynasty. Seeing Jiang Hao's reaction, Ji Luoyao was furious. Even when the old ministers lectured her, she hadn't been this angry, but remembering the purpose of her visit, she forced herself to calm down. She took a deep breath, looked down at Jiang Hao, tilted her chin up, exuding imperial authority, and said in an arrogant tone, "It seems the Duke of Wei hasn't realized his mistakes at all." Jiang Hao's eyes narrowed. His lazy demeanor vanished instantly, like a sleeping lion. He suddenly awoke, meeting his intense gaze. The Empress flinched, as if facing a formidable enemy. She felt an unprecedented sense of danger and instinctively took a few steps back, but the feeling passed quickly. When Ji Luoyao looked again, Jiang Hao was back to his lazy self. It was as if the whole thing had been an illusion. Ji Luoyao frowned. She was born with the body of the emperor and her senses were acute. She shouldn't be mistaken, but Jiang Hao. After so many years, she knew him too well. He might be clever and talented, but he posed no real threat to her. "I must be exhausted. I'm imagining things." Ji Luoyao shook her head and dismissed the thought. Looking at Jiang Hao, she continued, "Jiang Hao, let's skip the pleasantries. I just want to ask one thing. Do you want to get out of here?" "No," Jiang Hao answered immediately. Any hesitation would be disrespectful to the system. Are you kidding? He was lying around and collecting freebies every day. Why would he want to leave and go back to being a workaholic? Ji Luoyao was stunned. She hadn't expected that answer. What was even more surprising was that Jiang Hao hadn't even paused to think. She opened her mouth, at a loss for words. She stood there, awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Seeing her reaction, Jiang Hao had a flash of understanding. He laughed. "If I'm not mistaken, Your Majesty came to me because of the issue of dismantling the regional powers. Sounds like, it's not going well, though phrased as a question, Jiang Hao sounded certain. Ji Luoyao was startled, then her face hardened. You know too much. Even the jailers are talking about it. Imagine how big of a deal this is. Jiang Hao replied casually. Ji Luoyao's expression didn't change, but she was relieved. She wouldn't have to explain things. She said expressionlessly, since you know about it, I assume you have some ideas on how to resolve things. Tell me. I'm listening. Jiang Hao was speechless. Even with 2 lifetimes under his belt, he had never heard anyone phrase a request for advice so bluntly. How brazen did she have to be to say something like that? Jiang Hao couldn't help but stare at Ji Luoyao, as if she were some exotic animal. Finally, when Ji Luoyao couldn't take it anymore, Jiang Hao spoke softly, so. Your Majesty is begging me. Chapter 26. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So, Your Majesty, are you begging me? Jiang Hao asked, his voice low, as he looked at Ji Luoyao, her pupils dilated. It was as if she couldn't believe her ears. She stared at him, stunned. Jiang Hao, do you even hear yourself? Me, beg you? Are you kidding me? Jiang Hao, this prison cell's messing with your head. You're not making any sense. She let out an angry laugh, immediately dismissing the idea. She was the Empress, the supreme ruler of the great Zhou dynasty, the one who made the laws. How could she beg a prisoner? No matter how impressive Jiang Hao had been, he was still just her subject, and now he was a prisoner. Besides, a dignified empress doesn't lower herself to beg anyone. It was a joke. A ridiculous joke. Ji Luoyao's expression was one of utter disbelief. It was like trying to explain ice to a summer insect, but her extreme reaction only made Jiang Hao's smile widen. The stronger the reaction, the closer he was to the truth. He'd definitely hit a nerve. A proud empress would never, ever bow to anyone. Even if she were desperate, she'd never admit it. I must have been mistaken. In that case, Your Majesty, please leave. There's nothing to see here. Jiang Hao's tone was casual, like he was dismissing her. Ji Luoyao froze. She saw the knowing smirk on his face, and it felt like he could see right through her. Humiliation and anger flooded her, and she wanted to run. But she forced herself to remember the state of the dynasty. While things hadn't completely fallen apart, they were close. The 8 Kings' rebellion, if not resolved quickly, would plunge the court into a devastating war. The dynasty might never recover. As Empress, that was unacceptable. She couldn't afford to make a wrong move. And, aside from Jiang Hao, who always had a plan, she trusted no one. But he was refusing to help. She'd come to the Tianlao to see him in person. Wasn't that enough? She seethed inwardly. Jiang Hao, after everything, why are you doing this? She asked, staring intently at him. She couldn't comprehend how the man who had once supported her so wholeheartedly could be so cold. He'd changed. He really had. The moment Your Majesty threw me into this prison, everything ceased to exist, Jiang Hao said, his smile unwavering, his words final. Ji Luoyao felt a sharp pain, a sense of betrayal. She could do whatever she wanted, but he couldn't do the same to her. Fury rising, she asked through gritted teeth, so you're going to force me to this point? Jiang Hao sighed, then looked up at her, his voice calm. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. This is all your choice, Your Majesty. His stubbornness infuriated her. Especially compared to the state of the dynasty, his calm demeanor felt like a slap in the face. Jiang Hao! She exclaimed. You're still a citizen of the great Zhou, a part of this dynasty. I'm not asking you to do anything, but can you stand by and watch it fall into war? Can you watch innocent people suffer? Can you watch families torn apart? Ji Luoyao, abandoning her usual haughty manner, pleaded with him, but Jiang Hao remained unmoved. That's your responsibility, Your Majesty. You are the ruler of the great Zhou. Ji Luoyao's eyes widened. Jiang Hao, I misjudged you. I didn't think you were so heartless. No, not just me. The people misjudged you. They never expected you to be like this. That her words had no effect. Moral blackmail? Please. He'd seen it all before. It was a skill everyone mastered in his previous life. Ji Luoyao's attempts were amateurish. She couldn't even scratch the surface. I'm sorry, I truly wish I could help, but alas, I am powerless to do so. I can only disappoint your majesty. Ji Luoyao was at her wit's end. She couldn't force him to speak. Torture or threats. Who knew if his words were genuine or a trap? She was out of options. Except to bow her head and beg. But her pride wouldn't allow it. The situation wasn't hopeless. Not yet. She didn't need to sacrifice her dignity. Facing Jiang Hao's unyielding stance, her patience snapped, and her expression turned cold. Jiang Hao, you're a fool. You don't know what's good for you. Your Majesty is right, Jiang Hao said, I'm terrible at judging people. I was blinded long ago. Her fury, barely contained, surged back. This trip to the Tianlao was making her blood boil. She pointed at him, trembling with rage, unable to speak. Finally, she managed to regain control. Jiang Hao, you'll rot in this prison. Don't expect to ever leave. She spat out the words and stormed away, but as she hurried away, it looked more like she was fleeing. Just what I wanted. Thank you, Your Majesty, for granting my wish. Jiang Hao called after her. Ji Luoyao stumbled, nearly falling. Jiang Hao smiled to himself. But as he smiled, his eyes turned serious. Ji Luoyao, is she in the Dharma image realm? Chapter 27. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The human emperor body has a natural cloaking ability. Once the inner light is dimmed, it leaves no trace, making him appear completely ordinary. Even if someone's cultivation level is higher, it's tough to see through Jiang Hao without a really close inspection. That's why he's been able to hide his true strength. People just see him as a regular guy. On the other hand, Empress Ji Luoyao's temper tantrums caused her energy to surge, and she wasn't trying to hide it, making it easy for Jiang Hao to gauge her level. She's only in her 20s, but her cultivation has reached the Dharma image realm. Across the entire Great Zhou dynasty, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone younger at that level. As gifted as she is at ruling, Ji Luoyao's talent for cultivation is even more remarkable. At this rate, she could break through to the heavenly man realm in just a few years, assuming all goes well. But thinking about it, that makes sense. She awakened the human king body early on. Legendary status aside, the human king body is still a top-tier physique for cultivation. Becoming Empress also means she can access resources beyond imagining. Combined with her innate talent, it's no wonder she's progressing so fast. Plus, she practices secret royal techniques and has access to protective treasures, giving her a combat edge far beyond other Dharma image realm practitioners. The Archbishop of the Black Witch cult, 100 years old and barely at that level, wouldn't even be fit to lick her boots. Remember how easily the shadow demon controlled the Archbishop. Yet, facing Ji Luoyao, it hesitated to act, sensing a fatal threat. If I team up with the shadow demon and it gets a chance to strike, we might have a 50 to 60% shot, Jiang Hao mused, piecing together the shadow demon's reports. He's only at the Dragon Gate realm, but his foundation is extraordinary. Plus, he has the human king body, which naturally counters hers. And he has the element of surprise, his only weakness. Lack of combat experience. Against someone like Ji Xianjing, who's not as strong, he can just overpower them. But Ji Luoyao is a different story. Even with the shadow demon, he'd only have a 50 to 60% chance at best. Then again, a 50 to 60% chance against someone that's skilled is pretty good. Still, Jiang Hao decided to hold off. First, those odds are too low, and even if he did take her down, so what? This is the capital, crawling with powerful people. Forget Dharma image realm experts, even heavenly man realm masters wouldn't dare get out of line. As Empress, Ji Luoyao has a ton of guards, plus powerful people secretly protecting her. Unless Jiang Hao's ready to trade his life for hers, he'd have almost no chance of escape. And second, taking her down like that would be letting her off easy. Jiang Hao and Ji Xianjing agree on this point. Ji Luoyao wants to be the supreme empress, but she doesn't have the chops. She's impatient and loves to show off. If she keeps playing this game, she'll eventually screw herself over. The Eight Kings rebellion is just the beginning. If she doesn't handle things right, worse is coming. The more Ji Luoyao does, the harder she'll fall later, so, the longer she holds the throne, the more miserable she'll be. What better revenge could there be? So, I don't have to do anything. I can just sit back and watch it all unfold. Suddenly, Jiang Hao understood Ji Xuanjing's perspective. She's too weak to be a challenge, no need to lift a finger, just wait for her downfall, and Jiang Hao figures that day isn't far off. Then, he'll stand before Ji Luoyao and ask if she regrets her choices. Hope she can hang on a little longer, Jiang Hao muttered, watching the cell door where Ji Luoyao had disappeared. After all, he still needs time to reach that legendary immortal realm. Meanwhile, Ji Luoyao had left the prison. Her repeated failures with Jiang Hao left her fuming and frustrated. She couldn't vent to anyone, so she had to swallow her anger. It's easy to imagine how mad she was. Emerging from the prison, she exuded a cold aura that warned everyone to keep their distance. It was clear the Empress was in a foul mood. Even her closest confidants, like Sheng Wanqing, didn't dare ask questions. Ji Luoyao stopped at the prison gate, glancing back with a blank expression. She vowed never to return to that awful place. Back to the palace. With that, Ji Luoyao boarded her chariot and returned to the palace under heavy guard. Once back, she immediately summoned her top officials. I've decided to pull 500,000 troops from the surrounding areas and recruit another 500,000, raising a 1,000,000-strong army to fight the 8 northern kings. She announced without delay. Since Jiang Hao wouldn't advise her, she'd have to do it herself. 1,000,000 troops. The officials were stunned. While the 8 northern kings claimed to have 1,000,000 soldiers, that was a gross exaggeration. They'd be lucky to have a third of that in actual combat troops. In the Great Zhou dynasty, a decent soldier had to have at least entered the 6th level. The Empress was serious about 1,000,000 fighters. That's why everyone was so shocked. 1,000,000 troops is a huge number, Your Majesty. Maybe we should reconsider. The Minister of Revenue was the first to object. Ji Luoyao raised an eyebrow, her eyes flashing. The situation is urgent. What's to reconsider? Letting them get stronger. The Minister of Revenue trembled, nearly falling to his knees, but he stood his ground. The treasury isn't exactly overflowing. I doubt it can handle that kind of expense. 1,000,000 troops sounds impressive, but the cost is astronomical. Just feeding them would be a huge drain. If the war drags on, it could bankrupt the dynasty. Then raise taxes. Jiangnan is the wealthiest region, so raise taxes there. Ji Luoyao declared. To protect her dynasty, she'd make the people of Jiangnan suffer first. But Jiangnan was hit by a flood last year, displacing countless people. Duke Weiguo granted them a 3-year tax exemption. Someone reminded her. Hearing Duke Weiguo, Ji Luoyao snapped. I'm the ruler of the Great Zhou. What does Duke Weiguo's promise matter? I want taxes raised. Who dares disobey? Silence fell. They wanted to point out that breaking her promise would alienate the people and could cause unrest, but seeing her resolve, they exchanged glances and obeyed. Chapter 28. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Empress's troop buildup and tax hike stirred things up, naturally, but all the commotion in the world couldn't touch Jiang Hao in his prison cell. He kept up with his 3 squares a day, and slept like a log every night. Sure, she'd been taken to the cleaners by him, but the Empress had her pride. No way she'd spill the beans about what went down. Where's the face in that? The warden, Tao Gongwang, and the rest of the prison staff were clueless, of course, or, even if they had a hunch, they wouldn't dare to make a move without orders. After all, the Empress herself had deigned to visit Jiang Hao in person. That alone spoke volumes, so unless she personally gave the word, they'd keep their distance, wouldn't dare get too close, but they sure as heck wouldn't risk offending him either. Business as usual. By the book, which suited Jiang Hao just fine. Peace and quiet to slack off and do nothing, and while he was busy slacking, his cultivation was steadily climbing. Finally, I've hit perfection in the Dragon Gate realm. A few days later, Jiang Hao opened his eyes, a flicker of joy in them. It had been less than a month, like he'd expected, just over 20 days, he'd rocketed from breaking into the Dragon Gate realm to mastering it. now he had a full 360 acupoints in his body, each one maxed out, and each one crammed with an insane amount of yuan energy, more than 10 times what he had when he first broke through, plus 360 clone gods sitting tight in each acupoint, like 360 shining stars, blazing with divine light. All Jiang Hao had to do was think about it, and he could unleash all that raw yuan energy at once. With that kind of power, even Earth Demon Realm Masters might not withstand a full-force blow. He wasn't quite battle-hardened yet, but One Punch Man was looking more and more accurate. Next up, break into the Earth Demon Realm. To jump from Dragon Gate to Earth Demon, you needed to pull evil spirits into your body. Formally, that meant finding some special underground caves or evil pits to scavenge the evil stuff, but Jiang Hao didn't need to bother. The 18th level of Heavenly Prison, where he was holed up, was deep underground, and what was Heavenly Prison, anyway? Countless prisoners locked up every year, countless dying here. Over time, it had become a top-shelf treasure trove, a ready-made evil pit. Combined with the Emperor's body's magnetic pull, all he had to do was suck up the underground evil and aim for a breakthrough. With that in mind, Jiang Hao didn't waste time. He flopped down again, a mysterious aura swirling around him, like a sleeping dragon. The sleeping dragon technique had stacks of breakthrough methods logged inside. Jiang Hao just had to crack the book, follow those arcane steps, and the breakthrough would flow like water. The endless underground evil spiraled into his body, then it started melding with the yuan energy in his acupoints, and with each step, the door to the Earth Demon Realm creaked wider. Compared to breaking from the 6th level of the physical body into the Dragon Gate realm, this jump felt smooth as butter. And again, the breakthrough didn't trigger another upgrade to the Emperor's body, because breaking into the Dragon Gate realm was a shift from normal to supernormal. This time, though, both Dragon Gate and Earth Demon were firmly in the 5 supernormal realms. Without that baseline shift, the Emperor's body stayed put. Jiang Hao figured if he ever broke through from the Heavenman realm into the legendary Longevity realm, he might get another Emperor's body glow-up. After hitting the Earth Demon realm, Jiang Hao's progress finally slowed a hair. The higher you climb, the tougher it gets, right? But unlike most, Jiang Hao only saw a slight dip, because tons of Earth Demon energy had been building up under Heavenly Prison for ages. A regular guy would be laid up with back pain or some other ailment in no time, but Jiang Hao? This was a cultivation playground. Thanks to that endless supply of Earth Demon energy, his progress barely slowed down. Still full steam ahead, other Earth Demon Realm Masters would flip if they knew. Of course, if they somehow got tossed in Heavenly Prison, they'd be slapped with special shackles to seal off their cultivation. No free Earth Demon energy for them, but ordinary Jiang Hao. No need for restrictions. He was in his element. All in all, Jiang Hao was feeling right at home in Heavenly Prison, the place everyone else feared like the plague. A month to go from zero to hero, then another 20-odd days to zoom from Dragon Gate to Earth Demon. He'd been in Heavenly Prison for almost 2 months now. That 2-month mark had Jiang Hao itching with anticipation. The system tossed him goodies all the time, but the real special prizes dropped on days like these. Finally, one morning, the system pinged right on cue. Ding. 2 months of slacking earned you a special reward. Congrats, you got a Heroic Spirit card. Heroic Spirit card? The heck was that? Jiang Hao was stunned. He'd been swimming in system rewards for 2 months straight. Elixirs, combat moves, pets, monsters, even the legendary Emperor's body, a whole grab bag of stuff, but he'd at least heard of most of it. A Heroic Spirit card. Totally new to him, Jiang Hao zeroed in, and saw a mysterious card floating in the system space, and he felt a strong pull that this card was different. You couldn't just yank it into reality on a whim, because once you did, it was gone for good. No going back. At the same time, a tidal wave of info about the Heroic Spirit card washed over him. Turns out, it wasn't a real card, but a manifestation of the power of rules. Using it, you could summon heroic spirits from other times and places. These summoned spirits would become real people, ready to help him out. Jiang Hao perked up at that, then he saw a line scrawled across the golden Heroic Spirit card: the azure sky is dead, the yellow sky shall rise. Wait, is it him? A jolt went through Jiang Hao. He didn't hesitate. He picked up the Heroic Spirit card and used it. Instantly, the card burst into blinding light. The invisible power of the rules felt like it was cutting a hole through space-time. Then, 3 figures appeared in front of Jiang Hao, one after another. I am Zhang Jiao, a humble Taoist priest, paying respects to my lord. The first Taoist priest bowed low, the other 2 followed right behind him. I am Zhang Liang, paying respects to my lord. I am Zhang Bao, paying respects to my lord. Jiang Hao stared at the 3 of them, his head spinning. He'd guessed right, but not exactly. 1 heroic spirit card, 3 people. So, buy 1 get 2 free. Chapter 29. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Empress drafted 1,000,000 soldiers, leaving everyone wondering what would happen next, but the King of Yen was genuinely terrified. He clearly hadn't expected his niece to be so ruthless. The court just lost a minor skirmish, and she was doubling down. It made no sense. The 8 kings allied against her could only muster about 300,000 troops. If she really did send 1,000,000 soldiers, they'd be overwhelmed. He figured a single spit from each soldier could drown him, and the old saying about stopping a river with a whip would become reality. What am I going to do? The King of Yen took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure, but the fear in his eyes gave him away, and he wasn't alone. The civil and military officials who joined his rebellion were also panicking. 1,000,000 troops. The sheer thought of it was enough to scare anyone, let alone face them in battle. These weren't your average ancient army. Every soldier was a hardened warrior, far stronger than ordinary people. An army like this had tons of warriors, all as fast as a racehorse and strong as an ox, armed to the teeth in heavy armor. Each one could take on 100 soldiers without breaking a sweat. Plus, the commanders would be top-tier strongmen. Even experts from the heavenly realm wouldn't dare to charge into that kind of army alone. They'd get swarmed. How could they possibly stand against 1,000,000 troops? Everyone was speechless, and many were quietly wondering if it was too late to surrender. Suddenly, someone in the hall started laughing uncontrollably. Everyone looked to see who it was. The man was short and unremarkable, easily lost in the crowd. Yao Zhijia, the king is in council. What's wrong with you? Yeah, we're all racking our brains trying to figure out how to beat them, and you're laughing? Read the room, pal. He's gotta be a spy. Excited to hear the news. Your Majesty, arrest him. People recognized him and started shouting angrily. Yao Zhijia was a failed scholar from a poor family. He wasn't exactly a social butterfly. If the King of Yen hadn't been so fond of talent, he never would have gotten this far. The King of Yen frowned. He didn't order him arrested, but his expression made it clear he was not happy. Yao Zhijia, why are you laughing? He asked sternly. Yao Zhijia wasn't fazed. He stepped forward and bowed. I'm laughing at the Empress for digging her own grave. Your Majesty will soon rule the world, and that is cause for celebration. That the King of Yen was stunned, and so was everyone else. Were they hearing things? Had this guy lost it? The court's 1,000,000-strong army was coming, and they should be celebrating victory. Yao Zhijia saw their reactions and sneered. A bunch of useless privileged guys. He said loudly. A general who can command 100,000 soldiers is already exceptional, and someone who can command 1,000,000 is practically unheard of, even in the history of the great Zhou dynasty. And think of the cost. Each soldier needs at least 3 bowls of rice and half a pound of meat every meal. The daily expense would be astronomical. Even if the court has a lot of food stored, how long could they possibly keep that up? So, Your Majesty doesn't have to do anything. Just pull back into the city and wait for the 1,000,000 troops to collapse on their own. Then those 1,000,000 troops will turn on the court. That Yao Zhijia was clearly a talented strategist. In peaceful times, he was obscure, but in chaos, he found his chance to shine. People started to talk, and their spirits lifted. The King of Yan's eyes lit up. He looked at Yao Zhijia like he'd found a godsend, but not everyone was convinced. Someone asked, Mr. Yao's plan depends on the court having no capable commander for this 1,000,000-strong army. What if someone can command it, unify it, and strike like lightning? How could we possibly resist that? Without leadership, the army would collapse from the inside, but with a skilled commander who could unify it, it would be unstoppable. Yao Zhijia chuckled and shook his head. The Empress has been promoting a bunch of yes-men. Where would she find someone that talented? Besides, there's only one person in the Great Zhou who could turn the tide with 1,000,000 troops, and she threw him in prison. That's why I said she dug her own grave, that even Yao Zhijia couldn't help but look serious when he thought of that person, Duke Weiguo Jiang Hao. Many people recognize the name. Jiang Hao led the army as a civil official. In just a few years, he brought stability back to the Great Zhou. He governed the army on horseback and ruled the country on foot. He was like Zhuge Liang or Wang Meng, talented in both civil and military affairs. Of course, military affairs meant military strategy and leadership, not personal strength. His personal weakness was his only flaw, and it was that flaw the Empress exploited to take him down. What a waste that I can't use him, the king of Yen sighed, full of regret. Even with advisors like Yao Zhijia, he was a lot worse off than if he had Jiang Hao. Wait, I heard the Empress visited the heavenly prison a few days ago. Could she have been trying to get Jiang Hao out of retirement? Someone remembered. The room went silent. Even Yao Zhijia was stunned. Ask Jiang Hao to come back. If Jiang Hao came back, they were doomed. They might as well give up now. Was he reinstated? Someone asked urgently. No, according to the news, he's still in prison. The Empress looked furious when she left. I think the negotiation fell apart. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but Yao Zhijia was still frowning. Jiang Hao is cunning. This might be a trick to lower our guard. If he shows up after the army is assembled, we're finished. Yeah, the Empress and Jiang Hao have a weird relationship. If she begs him to come back, they could bury the hatchet. We have to stop this. The king of Yen, who had just relaxed, was now worried again. What should we do? He asked Yao Zhijia. Yao Zhijia's eyes gleamed. Jiang Hao has a fatal flaw. We can solve the problem once and for all by exploiting it. That he didn't say it explicitly, but the king of Yen understood. He'd already made arrangements for this, but the archbishop of the Black Witch cult not only killed Jiang Wennen but also vanished without a trace. Then, the news that he was being targeted by the Empress and that his vassal state was being reduced made the king of Yen anxious. And he had no time to deal with the matter, but now, there was no time to waste. It was time to cut the Gordian knot. The king of Yen took a deep breath and looked at a man in black robes in the hall. Helian Feng, this is up to you. This concerns our lives. Don't let me down. Helian Feng was the pope of the Black Witch cult. The Black Witch cult had been hunted down by the court's secret police and suffered heavy losses. Only a few survivors remained, protected by the king of Yen. Helian Feng had to step up, otherwise, the Black Witch cult would be finished. He couldn't refuse the king of Yen. The Black Witch cult needed the king to survive, so, the king couldn't lose, and Jiang Hao had to die. I will handle this personally, Helian Feng said calmly. Rest assured, your majesty. His words were full of confidence, and everyone trusted him. Helian Feng was a genuine expert in the heavenly realm. Chapter 30. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After Helian Feng accepted the mission, he didn't waste any time. He hopped on some exotic bird and flew straight to the Great Zhou dynasty's capital. Arriving by nightfall, once darkness fell, he'd managed to sneak into the imperial city. Sure, he was on the court's most wanted list, but a powerhouse like him in the heaven realm was more than a match for your average Joe. Only a massive army would pose a real threat. That being said, the heavenly prison wasn't your average lockup. Even Helian Feng wasn't about to barge in alone, even if he could. The place was a maze, and he could get lost trying to find anyone. Plus, a fight would bring the whole place down on him. Even if he escaped, he'd tip them off, making it that much harder to eliminate Wei Duke Jiang Hao. Luckily, the king of Yen had been pulling strings for years and had plenty of people even in the capital. Before long, 3 guys showed up to meet him. I'm Wei Yilong. Honored to meet you, Senior Helian. I'm Fu Quan. Honored to meet you, Senior Helian. I'm Jiang Wenhua. Honored to meet you, Senior Helian. They quickly introduced themselves. Helian Feng just nodded, keeping his cool. As a heaven realm master, he had that right. The other 3 weren't slouches either, all Dharma image realm masters. To take out Jiang Hao, the king of Yen was pulling out all the stops, betting everything he had in the capital. Wei Yilong was a protector from the 5 poison sect. Fu Quan was an incense master for the White Lotus sect. The Five Poison sect and White Lotus sect were in the same boat as the Black Witch sect, branded as evil cults by the court, the big three demon sections. Their only way out was to throw their lot in with the King of Yen. Big three demon sects sounded impressive, but who wants to be a demon sect if they can be legit? Recruiting was a nightmare, nobody wants to join the bad guys. But the court controlled the narrative, so they had no choice. Their only option was to flip the script by helping the King of Yen succeed. Jiang Wenhua was the younger brother of the late Justice Minister. Jiang Wenan, the two brothers, one in politics, one in the military, had secretly sided with the King of Yen years ago. With the King of Yan's backing, they'd climbed the ranks. Here's the kicker, both were traitors, but the Empress saw Jiang Wenan as a loyal hero, and loved Jiang Wenhua, promoting him right along. If he could, Jiang Wenhua would've preferred staying in the court, riding his brother's coattails, but the King of Yen had dirt on him, a signed letter of allegiance. Now that the king had given the order, he couldn't back out. Can you get me to Wei Duke Jiang Hao? Helian Feng's eyes zeroed in on Jiang Wenhua. Compared to the martial artists, Jiang Wenhua, as a court official, was the only one with that kind of access. If my brother was still alive, as the Minister of Justice, he could waltz into the heavenly prison. But I'm just a general in the Imperial Guards, we're different departments. The warden might not give me the time of day. Jiang Wenhua was straight up. What do we do, then? Helian Feng frowned. The King of Yen wants this done tonight. I don't want any complications. Jiang Wenhua and the other two exchanged glances, thought it over, and came up with a plan. Okay, we find the warden, bribe him first. If that doesn't work, we threaten him. We make him take us to Jiang Hao, and then we get the hell out of the capital. They were already planning their escape. This was a major crime. Helian Feng himself might not be able to guarantee their safety, let alone the three of them. If they didn't bail from the capital ASAP, the court would come down on them like a ton of bricks. They had to wrap things up fast and get to the King of Yan's territory for safety. The four of them hashed out the details. Then, Jiang Wenhua took the lead, with the other three as backup, heading straight for the heavenly prison. Heavenly prison. Warden Tao Gongwang was caught off guard when he heard Jiang Wenhua wanted to see him. He didn't know why Jiang Wenhua was at the prison, but the guy was his old boss's brother, and a general in the Imperial Guards, so he couldn't just blow him off. He didn't think twice and told the jailer to show him to his office. I need to see the Wei Duke. Can you make that happen? Jiang Wenhua cut to the chase as soon as he arrived. Well. Tao Gongwang hesitated, seeing that, Jiang Wenhua thought he had a shot and pressed his advantage, making up a story on the spot. To be honest, I think the Wei Duke might have had something to do with my brother's death. I mean, my brother met with the Duke that day and was killed by an assassin that night. I just want to ask the Duke if he knows anything. Please, for my brother's sake. He pulled out some high-denomination gold notes and slipped them into Tao Gongwang's hand. Tao Gongwang glanced at the money, then back at Jiang Wenhua. He paused, but he finally steeled himself and pushed the notes back. I'm sorry, Lord Jiang. It's not that I don't want to help, but His Majesty has forbidden anyone from visiting the Wei Duke, and she was just here a few days ago. I can't disobey her order. Jiang Wenhua pocketed the gold and shook his head at the three behind him. If Tao Gongwang cooperated, great, they could have kept things quiet, but now that he was playing hardball, they had no choice but to go with Plan B, force. There were four of them, one in the Heaven Realm and three in the Dharma Image Realm. Tao Gongwang, despite being the warden, was just a Dragon Gate Realm master. He was no match for them. After some friendly persuasion, Tao Gongwang saw the writing on the wall. Under duress, he agreed to lead the way. Obeying the Empress was tough, but self-preservation was tougher. With Tao Gongwang leading, the path was clear. Lord Jiang, and, gentlemen. The Wei Duke is up ahead. Here's the key to the cell. You can just knock me out. I promise I won't say a word. Please don't kill me. I don't want to get blood on your hands. Tao Gongwang's voice trembled as he pulled the key from his belt. The four looked at each other. They'd been around the block. Instead of taking the key, they just motioned for Tao Gongwang to open the door. He sighed and walked forward. unlocking the heavy chains on the 18th floor of the prison, and pushing open the cell door, but the moment the door swung open, they froze. Duke Jiang Hao wasn't alone on the 18th floor, there were 3 other Taoists with him. At the moment, the Duke and the 3 Taoists seemed to be having a lively discussion, all chatting away. Helian Feng and the others immediately glared at Tao Gongwang, but it turned out Tao Gongwang was even more shocked than they were. "Who are you?" he blurted. "How did you get in here?"